Paper Cut Club on Oman FM.
Hello and welcome to the Paper Cut Club on Oman FM, where we discover the world and ourselves through the beauty of the written word. I'm your host, Fatma Makki. What does home mean to you? I've heard answers to this question countless times, and I'm always intrigued to hear an endless variety of definitions. I believe that this is one of the many fundamental truths that literature explores in a staggeringly diverse way. Today, we're going to be exploring the concept of the home and what that means to different people and in different places. And I will have the pleasure of doing this today with my friend Sara Al Lamki, Papercut Book Club member, freelance communication consultant, and founder of handmade pottery business, Scene Ceramics. Sara, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
I'm so glad to have you here. I've been actually wanting to have you on the show from the beginning, but I needed to find the right book. So I'm glad we actually found two.
Yeah, I'm glad too, and hopefully the first of many.
Yes. Let's introduce quickly the books that we'll be reading, and I want to also talk a little bit more about all the many things that you do every day.
With my hands.
Yes, with your hands, yes. So we're going to be talking about two books which are themed around the home, inside and out. So the first one is A Map of Home by Randa Jarrar, which is one that you suggested that we read together. This was the first suggestion I had for the book club. Was that why you read it?
Yeah, exactly. So the first meeting of the book club, there were two options, which was Pachinko and this one, both brilliant books. But after we read Pachinko, I decided to read this one because I was so intrigued, and I'm so glad that you had recommended it.
Yeah.
So I felt like it definitely warranted a discussion, and that's why I suggested it today.
Yeah. And the next book is one that I came across, The Beauty of Everyday Things by Soetsu Yanagi, who's a Japanese philosopher. So obviously very different themes, but I think it's suitable for you because as soon as I saw the book, I mentioned this to you before, as soon as I saw the book, I thought of you because you have your business, Scene Ceramics. So I obviously thought this was relevant. Do you have like a Japanese kind of inspiration for your...
You know, not for my ceramics. The Japanese method is very specific, and it kind of is a bit different from the way I was taught how to do pottery. But I love it. Every ceramicist, every craft person loves Japan, becomes a little bit obsessed with all the different things that Japanese crafts can offer. And pottery is one of them, but so many others as well. Like I do a little bit of origami. And then there's another one that he touches upon in the book, but doesn't give it a name. Maybe the name came later, but it's Kintsugi. And that's the art of repairing broken pottery with gold, with lacquer and gold. And I've just purchased a Kintsugi kit because I was doing some of the markets in the last couple of months, and every market day I broke at least one piece. In the last market, more than one. And I felt it was good luck. It was kind of, superstitiously all the bad kind of fortune breaking in that piece. It was not meant to be sold that day. But I bought this kit so that I could save some of those and just remember these pieces, like reimagine them and create new beauty out of them. And he does talk about that, how they make even flaws obvious, but just not intentionally. It was a functional way to repair pottery, like nothing broken or nothing warped or nothing distorted is ugly. Everything is beautiful just in and of itself. And I love the concept of that.
Yeah, I love that idea as well. And it's smarter as well if you think about it, because when you try to repair something and make it look exactly like it was before, you can totally tell. So this is a way of honoring that object in a totally new way. So I really love that concept. So when you bought the Kintsugi set, was it before I told you about... It was before.
It just happened. It was right after this piece broke, and it was one of my favorites. It's like a half moon, like a crescent moon shaped vase that I had made, and it was the first time I made it, and it just dropped as I was setting up my stall. But it broke in very obvious pieces. So it's like, I'm going to keep this. And then a little bit later, I had a crack of a bowl that I had put in the kiln. It happens, and he says that as well, based on the firing. Sometimes things crack as soon as you open the kiln. And one of my followers actually said, just mend it with gold or something. Like there's beauty in the flawed. And I was like, yes, exactly. So I said, I have to buy this kit because there's going to be so many uses and so many times that I'm going to want to mend some beautiful pieces and keep them like that.
Wow, that's beautiful. Well, I actually have my favorite teacup that I have tea in every morning is actually cracked, so maybe I should bring it to you for repair.
Yes, because you shouldn't be using it. Bacteria is festering in that crack.
No, I always use the other side. I always have this, like, I know I shouldn't be using it in general, but I can't let it go. I love it so much. Okay, I'll bring it to you. You'll be my first.
You could turn it into a candle. You could turn it into a vase. There's so many things you can do with it.
Or I could turn it into another type of teacup.
Yes, you could. You could do that too.
Our theme for the day is the home, the concept of the home. And this is something that obviously, as I mentioned before, it's just exhausted endlessly through literature, and it's something that comes up. And in fact, that's kind of the reason why I suggested a map of home as an option against pachinko, because they both talk about home in a similar way, because they're about roots and displacement and war, essentially. They examine the home or the idea of the home from the same lens. So yeah, I just thought it would be fun to look at it in this way. I kind of came up with a theme after, we agreed on the books, because I could see the link between them. And I thought it was nice and poetic.
Very fitting as well. Being stuck at home for the last 2 years, I feel like a lot of people have also rediscovered their homes. I know I did. I was always planning something every day to be out of the home. So you go to work, you're planning something for the afternoon, and then you're probably either going out or bringing food in. You're never really home, or at least I was never really home until the last 2 years, and just appreciating it. And you go through all those phases, right, of grief, so denial and acceptance, whatever they are. But then you really start to appreciate the home. And I felt that this was very fitting. These essays really make you think about the beauty of everyday things. I mean, that's what it's called.
And actually, I think both elements of each book that we're going to be discussing today is something that we've been thinking a lot about over the past couple of years. Not just because of the pandemic, but because of the rise in displaced people around the world in general. So this subgenre of literature, of a map of home, is actually, I think, a very compelling one to explore these days, because it's just growing so rapidly. So yeah, let's get into a map of home. Randa Jarrar's fresh, funny, and fearless debut novel chronicles the coming of age of Nidali, one of the most unique and irrepressible narrators in contemporary fiction. Born in 1970s Boston to an Egyptian Greek mother and a Palestinian father, the rebellious Nidali, whose name is a feminization of the word struggle, soon moves to a very different life in Kuwait. There, the family leads a mildly eccentric middle-class existence until the Iraqi invasion drives them first to Egypt and then to Texas. So already from the blurb, we can tell that this book jumps around from place to place. So the concept of home is definitely going to be something that's going to be dynamic and in question at all times, let's just say. But what were your first impressions of this book in general? Let's start with that.
Honestly, it really blew my mind. I thought it was amazing because it really gave us an idea of the Palestinian diaspora, the struggle of that time, but it was just a backdrop. It's also a coming-of-age story. She's just a 13-year-old when the Gulf War happens, and I really liked that it was more about her and her feelings and just navigating normal teenage, adolescent issues with this really kind of almost depressing backdrop of displacement and feeling of otherness. So I loved it. It was one of my favorite books that I read last year.
What was this like? How familiar were you with Arabic literature in English before then? Because for me, this was uncommon for me to venture into this territory.
No, I've definitely read a few. I'm just trying. I mean, I read a lot of Najib Mahfouz, but translated.
Oh, okay.
A lot. He was my brother's favorite author and was always reading it in Arabic. And I was never patient enough, unfortunately. Maybe don't include that. But I've read a lot of translated Najib Mahfouz and a few others. Like this, that's the first one that comes to mind, even though it's a very different theme. But no, I love Middle Eastern literature.
Oh, okay.
So I do try and read it successfully and sometimes unsuccessfully. but I've read a few.
Yeah.
But this one was the first time that was kind of, it really pushed boundaries. It talked about a lot of themes that might be uncomfortable for people from the region. And I listened to a podcast about her when she first published this book with a very ignorant American.
Oh, wow.
And it was fascinating. Like even the guy who was hosting the podcast said her name it's pronounced Randa, but it's spelled Randa. And I know that because she just told me. It was just
That's so awkward.
It was really shocking. And just the way he was navigating this podcast really made me feel about how important pieces of literature like this are, because we live it. But most of the world doesn't. And she says actually in that podcast how, because he says, I'm not very aware of the conflict. And she says, you're not meant to. You're shielded from it, because really we want, like the media wants the West to feel a certain way about the conflict, you know. It just surprises me because we're in it all the time, right? We see it all the time and we talk about it all the time. But this was a very, I think, important work of literature, but also a very fresh perspective, because it was just her, Nidali, living her life with this backdrop of displacement.
That's true. Actually, the fact that the story of the displacement and the exile from country to country, the fact that that was a backdrop and not in the forefront, kind of is what, in my mind, distinguishes it from all other Arab literature, in my mind. One of the reasons why I actually stopped reading, I remember I put down several books before getting to this one, because it's just so relentlessly depressing to read Arabic literature. Because, yes, you know, this is also a book about war and all of the side effects of war, or maybe the intentional effects of war, which is displacement and loss of cultural identity. But she has such a good command of the language that she's able to just approach these topics with so much more levity in a way. Throughout the book, the character Nidali, which is loosely or actually quite closely based on her actual experience, she writes a letter. She writes letters throughout the book, and because it's clear that this is how the young adolescent Nidali expresses herself or is able to make sense of her thoughts, I think. She writes letters to different people, and one of the letters she writes is to Saddam Hussein to like explain to him how horrible the stuff that like how horrible the impact of his war was on her, you know. And it was just so funny because it was also a rude letter as well, like there was you know, some rudeness in there, and it does that thing which it's so hard to do in literature, which is to take something so vast and incomprehensible and make it show up on the page in a very succinct way. I think she has such a good skill with that.
And I think it's because it's semi-autobiographical that she can be so raw about it, and so it doesn't feel like she's trying to garner sympathy or support for the Palestinian cause or hatred for, you know, the Gulf War or anything like that, because this is actually just what happened to her.
Yes, exactly.
And so it's so honest that it's much more palatable, like you said.
And she doesn't really go into any real political commentary. She just talks about how her or the character as a young person interpreted these things. And actually, one of the things that I really loved about this book was that because it was set in the Gulf, which is so rare to read a book which is set in the Gulf and written by an Arab, is for the book to address things that we actually go through. You know, like the classes where she talks about learning the Quran and having classmates in her class who were not Muslim, and then her understanding the difference between Muslim and non-Muslim. Or when she was invited to a birthday party and then her dad found out it was a mixed party. Like,
relatable things, yeah.
Very relatable. Yeah. And so I've never seen a good book address this emphasis on good.
Yeah, no, that's true actually. Because when you were asking me earlier about reading any other books from the region, I mean, maybe all of them were translated actually. I'm not sure if I've ever read a book that was intended to be written, like that was actually written in English. And not many of them are with an ulterior motive. You know, this is really just an amazing work of fiction. It is what it is. You know?
Exactly.
But in the podcast as well, she talks about how she doesn't feel at home anywhere. She identifies as Palestinian, but she didn't find a home anywhere. Not in Kuwait, not in Egypt, obviously not in Palestine. She never lived there, and not in the US, which she moved to at 13, the author and the character in the book. And I think that comes up a lot in the book as well, that feeling of other. There's this thing that I highlighted that she says, it turned out everyone here was half one thing, half another. I thought this would make me feel at home, but instead I was sad that I was no longer special. And I think that's very, I think a lot of immigrants feel that way, right? That you identify yourself as one thing, and then when you find out everyone is like that, then you're no longer special, but it doesn't give you that sense of belonging either.
Yes.
You know?
Yeah.
But I felt that was a really nice kind of almost anti-home kind of theme that came out in the book. Yeah, she talks about it a lot, actually, being like so many parts of the whole. But this is when she reaches the US. It says there was white neighbors came to visit. I told their daughters who were 10 and 11 that I was half Egyptian, half Palestinian. We are half German, half Irish. They said, not batting an eye. It turned out everyone here was half one thing, half another.
Yeah.
I thought this would make me feel at home, but instead I was sad that I was no longer special.
Yeah.
So, and I feel like this is almost a unique thing to the US as well, because I feel like other parts of the world don't try and assimilate as much. Like, I'm just thinking of Europe. They're always very in touch with where they're from. Even after 2, 3, 4 generations, they're still, you know, Indian or Nigerian or whatever. Whereas in the US, there's this fight to live that American dream. And she talks about that a lot, about how her parents, and in the podcast, I'm sorry, I keep referring to this podcast because I just listened to it, about how her parents in real life kept aspiring to this American dream and only wanted to buy properties in white neighborhoods. And here as well, like they're constantly, you know, they try and speak Arabic at home, but outside they don't do that. They constantly speak in English, and with their accent, I think it says somewhere, with their accents, the only thing to keep them company. You know, it's like that constant trying to belong and portray and achieve this American dream that sold so much. And you almost lose yourself. Then you're neither here nor there.
This is actually something that I've seen come up several times when I've looked at discussions or taken part in discussions about like immigrant experiences in America, how they overcompensate and try to overemphasize their Americanness so that people don't think of them. It's like a defense tactic. Well, this is what I heard being said. I don't want to speak on that behalf of that demographic, of course, but it kind of makes sense. I get it, you know, I definitely get it, especially for Arabs. At almost any point in recent history, there's always this, how should we say, standoffish relationship maybe.
Because of the negative kind of connotations of it being Arab. Therefore, you either become extremely Arab or extremely Western or extremely non-Arab, so that you can prove I am not like those Arabs. And I think that's kind of prevalent in a lot of the literature, not just fiction, but, you know, opinion pieces, podcasts, essays, things like that. And
I think also another thing is I noticed, especially obviously in Palestinian literature or fiction written by Palestinian authors or part Palestinian authors, there's the topic of home and the homeland and returning. It's always there, you know, and that's obvious. The reason why is obvious, I think. But I thought it was so beautifully expressed by the father character, who is just referred to as Baba, but his name is Wahid in the book. And I'll just read this part out. It says here, in their first year of marriage, my parents had already moved twice. Baba said that moving was part of being Palestinian. Our people carry the homeland in their souls, he would tell me at night as he tucked me. This was my bedtime story when I was 3 or 4. You can go wherever you want, but you'll always have it in your heart. I'd think to myself, that's such a heavy thing to carry. And then she talks about her time, her memory of visiting the homeland just once. And
he asks her to draw a map or something,
yes, right? Yes, that's later on. And actually he would make her memorize the map, wouldn't he? He asked her to memorize the map, which it was such an insight into that world. And I've tried, as I mentioned, so remember when I've mentioned previously that I've tried reading Palestinian fiction before. Well, I've tried reading Arab fiction. A lot of it was Palestinian, and I have it still on my shelf. And I put it down because I couldn't get past the first few chapters. It was too heavy for me at the time. But this was able to express something and give me like a feeling of what it must feel like. Just a glimpse, though, because it's never possible to, I think, express it fully. What it must feel like to be displaced and to know you have a home but are unable to return to it. And also this concept of a home that you know is supposed to belong to you, but you've never actually been or have only been there once. You were not born there, you know. It's so complicated.
And I think that theme keeps coming up because they leave Kuwait, so then that becomes home, Kuwait, and then with the intention of coming back, and they never come back. And then she settles in Egypt, and then all of a sudden she has to leave there as well. And then, you know, and so it's that constant displacement that is so, I guess that's what you just read, kind of essential to being Palestinian. You'll never go home and you'll never really be home.
Yes.
And I think that that's something that she really tries to push without being pushy.
Yeah.
And I think that that's a really beautiful thing.
Yeah. She's so skilled. The more I think about this book, the more I realize just what an achievement it was. You know, the character of Nidali, and obviously Randa by extension, was clearly a very observant young person, you know, and she was able to pick up on so many observations. Like, for example, when her uncle, I think her father's cousin, came to visit, the highly religious uncle who removed all her favorite stickers from her bedpost, or, you know, and all of these things. She just makes all of these observations about being like coming from this place, but not really being of the population. And in fact, she doesn't even mention the local population, the native population of Kuwait. And that just shows you how separated they really are. And I think that probably exists to some extent across the Gulf, really. There's a big division.
You can see it here as well, right? There's so many populations here that then form pockets. And I think that's prevalent everywhere.
Yeah,
even
true.
If we're talking about the US again, you know, you really look for people that are like you.
Yeah.
And here, I mean, if you think of so many of the communities that are either Omanized or expats or, you know, always they form pockets of little communities just to kind of have that point of commonality.
Yeah.
And it's the same there, right? They have these friends that are kind of like them, that are not, you know, like you said, not really, you never really integrate.
Yeah.
You're always kind of in the suburbs.
True.
And I think when she moves, Nidali, when she moves to the US, she kind of rebels from that, right? Because of the abusive relationship with her father and everything like that, she really wants to rebel and therefore tries to do everything un-Arab. And that happens, right? You always get those extremes, and every teenager is rebellious. But in this sense, even more so, because she has the opportunity to be in this whole new land where she can run away and she can, you know, be with people that don't remind her of home at all.
Yeah.
And there was another one when she's almost manifested. She doesn't use that word, but she tells the story of drawing something in the window, how her mother, the grandmother, used to draw things in the window to manifest.
I don't remember that part.
Okay, so basically, the mom, Nidali's mom, is doodling on the front steps with chalk, and she doodles a piano. And she tells the story of her mother-in-law, basically her mother-in-law, drawing things on the window, and it would come true. It was basically manifestation. And then she actually finds a piano at the market that she gets for very cheap. And then Nidali says, I sat and watched her, jealous of how easily she seemed to root herself here. Me, I felt splintered, like the end of a snapped-off tree branch. I had even taken to talking to myself, keeping me company, narrating my own movements. In this way, me became her, I became Nidali, you, she. And then there's a couple of chapters where she does that, like in second person.
Yes.
But I found that really interesting, because it's also a personality thing. You know, how her parents really just wanted to find roots, wanted to assimilate. And she, because she never had that, and she was constantly displaced from a young age, she doesn't know how to do that. No. So born in the US, visiting Palestine, living in Kuwait, then in Egypt, then in the US. How are you ever supposed to root yourself?
Yes.
You know?
Yeah. And I think, honestly, for me, I really think the best the time, I don't know, this is a total opinion on my part, that it seemed to me that she felt most at home in Egypt. Did you feel that as well?
Yes, I feel like it was also living with her grandfather.
Yes,
is it?
yeah.
I feel like there was that because he wasn't strict. He didn't impose on her the things that, you know, there's so much of it is about your actual home environment as well. She never felt at home with her parents, right?
Yeah.
Because of the kind of dysfunctionality, which she talks about in the podcast as well.
Oh, I want to know more about that. Yeah.
So living with her grandfather, who is much freer with her and really allowed her to explore unintentionally, right?
Yeah.
He was just sick and kind of out of it. It made her feel like she could be herself, where she never felt that at home. And that brings to mind that, you know, home also is the people, right? And if you don't feel at home with your own family, how could you feel at home in that place anyway?
Yeah, no, I loved Randa's approach, and I actually have her next, well, I don't know if it was the one that immediately after, but her latest book is a full-on memoir. So it's directly about her life, and it's called Love is an Ex-Country.
Yes.
You have it?
Last year, no, but I read about it.
Okay. So I am planning I wanted to read that, but I'm glad I waited until now because this is now fresh in my memory, because I feel so sure that there's going to be a lot of the themes from this, or I don't know, at least some of the themes from this are going to be explained, especially with a title like Love is an Ex-Country. I'm curious to see how she's going to carry on this conversation about finding home.
Yeah, while I was looking for the podcast about the book, there were quite a few and a lot about this, you know, like a press tour kind of thing related to this book. So I'm just curious about her in general.
Yeah.
She seems very spunky.
She is. The Beauty of Everyday Things by Soetsu Yanagi. The Beauty of Everyday Things is about the objects that fill our everyday lives and are constant companions. As such, writes philosopher and Japanese folk craft pioneer Soetsu Yanagi, they should be made with care and built to last, treated with respect and even affection. They should be things of beauty. Inspired by the work of the craftsman Yanagi encountered on his travels through Korea and Japan, these now classic essays are a heartfelt call for us to deepen our relationship with the objects that surround us. So I came across this book completely at random at Borders, and I was struck by the cover with a very beautiful teapot. Japanese design is generally becoming a very big thing in the world, I think, nowadays. Like, I've been noticing an increase in small businesses in Oman, and chiefly yours, Scene Ceramics, which seem to hint at a trend of like a desire to return to these types of crafts, you know? They've definitely been falling out of favor over time, and now suddenly I'm noticing like a recurrence. So I thought this would be really nice to look at, because everyone's starting to think more and more about what makes a home, actually, like the physical dwelling. And over the past couple of years, I've gone through various phases with my homes. I've also gone and moved to various different homes. And so this concept is always in my mind. What do I surround myself with? What objects do I want around me? And this just took it to a whole nother level. So what did you think about him in general?
Well, there was one thing which I had mentioned to you, is that the language and the way he expresses kind of distaste for all things Western, it's a bit jarring in our very politically correct world. So I did find that a little bit shocking, but I thought it was worth reading. I mean, these essays really make you think about the beauty of everyday things. I mean, that's what it's called.
Yeah.
And I really like the way he describes from the beginning, I think a little bit bombastically, that it has to be utilitarian to be beautiful.
Yeah.
I wish he gave more examples, you know, because he kept describing, but not saying, other than the tea, which comes later, he doesn't really say, oh, take this bed sheet or take this cushion. You know what I mean? I wish there was more of that, because then it was, but maybe that's a good thing, forcing me to think of those kinds of things in our own home or in our own context. And the thing that came to mind was the pottery that they do in Behla.
Interesting.
You know, the red kind of pots that for water.
Oh, yeah.
Or, you know, the hanging kind of earthenware pots. And that's, you know, clay that they forage in Bahla themselves, like just from the earth, and then make very utilitarian, en masse products, sell for really quite cheaply, often flawed, and passed down through generations. And it is something that's almost dying because the people who practice this craft are very elderly. They try to teach their kids, but, you know, it's kind of modernizing almost in a bad way. And this kind of reminded me of that.
I think so too. I actually made so many, drew so many comparisons between whatever situation was happening in Japan at the time that these essays were written by Yanagi, and what is kind of happening right now, which is like a craft making is just less widespread. That's just a fact, I think, and how that's going to impact future generations of the people from that country.
But it's making a comeback, right? Even in Japan, it's like making people come back to home.
Yeah,
almost.
I actually think Yanagi had a really big role to play in that. Like, I didn't realize it until I looked him up some more after reading this book, and I realized that at that time in Japan's history, they were facing a real onslaught. Like, I don't know what other word to use for it, but onslaught of industrialization that was coming in from the West. And because of that industrialization, a lot of the cottage industries that surrounded the country, that really make up the craft industry and a huge part of the economy and way of life in general in Japan, was under threat all in one go. And so this led to like a rise in nationalistic feeling, I think, in people, and he became an advocate for folk crafts. So I think it was like a necessary evil for him to like be very strongly against other types of I'm trying to like defend him. I don't know why.
No, but I mean, I agree, because even though I read it and I was a little bit shocked and like taken aback, there's certain things that I thought about later and I was like, actually, he's right. So one of the things that really struck me was the idea that modern is Western. I found that really interesting because we do that as well a lot here. And it's a thing of pride, you know, to have like a modern home, which is completely removed from anything kind of, I don't know, what's the word?
Rooted in our own.
Not rooted, but like that looks, I mean, really modern is Western. Yeah. It doesn't look like the traditional homes or the homes that our parents were trying to build.
Even having dining tables, like dinner tables, in our houses is strange.
Yeah.
You know?
I mean, so many things. And I think that that's something that so many cultures experience, but he really voices it in a way that's, you know, pointing it out that it is negative, which I found really interesting. I had never really thought of it like that, you know, and we're always so proud of everything modern. Even now when you look at commercial buildings, or even if you look at our neighbors and all the skyscrapers, we were so like distaste, you know, it was like so bad, they're modernizing and it's bad, but then you do it, and it really came from the West, right?
Yes.
And I mean, it's not a bad thing. It's fine to modernize or Westernize. I mean, you could call it either way, but I think staying appreciating and loving what is kind of folkly, or you know, is also important. And I think that pointing that out, if you can remove kind of his very
politically charged
statements, then I think that the key messages are really important in there as well.
No, I actually pulled out a quote. Yes, he wrote, "The day will come, I firmly believe, when the miscellaneous things that were formerly the most common craftware will be looked upon with love and affection." And I really think that's already happened. We're in that situation now where we're picking up, like you brought in this really beautiful Japanese tea bowl, which is gorgeous. And I'm assuming, I don't know, I'm not an expert, but this is like once upon a time was an everyday item. Probably you could find dozens of these or many of these in every home in Japan. But now when we look at these things, we're like, oh, this is so beautiful. It's so precious, you know, and it is beautiful. I'm not trying to say it's not, but this was every day, you know, this was everyday stuff for people in Japan. And we have that as well. We're starting to be like that.
I mean, I feel that way also with Amani silver.
Yes,
And
exactly.
our parents' generation, they just had tons of Omani silver in every home, right? Under every coffee table or glass table. There's all this Omani silver, and now it's so expensive. We don't have it the same. It's a real rare commodity.
Yeah.
And so many things are like that. And it is important to realize how precious it is.
Yeah.
But on the flip side, not to be all praise for Yanagi, one thing which I thought was really amazing that he points out, but doesn't really practice what he preaches, is developing this non-critical attitude. So I thought that that's amazing. Like this is the way, you know, when he talks about seeing and knowing. If you're non-critical, then you can accept beauty without having preconceived notions, which I think is absolutely true. Like I think that this is something to live by, but he doesn't write the book in that way at all. So I found that quite
he doesn't practice what he preaches. He's very critical. I get what he was trying to say, that you need to know things intuitively, like appreciate beauty intuitively. He explained that the Western ideal of beauty is based on the attainment of perfection, which is what he describes as the beauty of even numbers. Okay, and versus the Asian perception of beauty, which is the beauty of odd numbers, which celebrates imperfections, which we just talked about. So he knows that there's a different perception of beauty. So if he's looking at Western objects, he should be judging them based on Western eyes or Western standards. You know, it doesn't make sense. And just like how with Japanese objects, it would make absolutely no sense to judge them based on Western criteria, which would be completely at odds with the way in which this was created.
This book is really only comparing the two, but there are so many in between. And
that's another, I mean, there's no way that this book could have explored other styles of beauty anyway, because it just wasn't relevant, I don't think.
And also the time that it was written. Yeah, I mean, we do have to take it in context, right? We can't judge it based on today's, even though there's like some timeless kind of wisdom. But it is in colonial Japan, when Japan was an empire, and there were so many colonial powers. And of course, all colonial powers thought that they were the best. Right? And there's so many other works of literature or of essays, like the British during the empire, or any empire really, you know. So it does need to be looked at with that kind of grain of salt as well. The other thing I wanted to read was how he talks about the infinite riches when he's talking about tea, which I love. And I think the Japanese tea ceremonies are also really amazing. And like the tea bowl, like every tea bowl is unique, and most of them, or they used to be handmade. Now, of course, there's so much kind of factory made. But it was all based on simplicity, and he describes as one of the infinite riches to be found in a life of honest poverty, which I think is also really amazing. But then he also, I feel, knocks it down, because he talks about how trying to preserve that is trying too hard, and therefore removes all the beauty. But
I think what he's talking about is intentional manipulation to make things, you know what I mean?
But also, I think that if you can't do it in the same way that it was intended, isn't it also trying to honor it by manipulating it a little bit, trying to get back to that craft? If you can, I mean, after so many generations today, you can never reproduce that, right? All the original people are dead. So in trying to forcefully do it, maybe it will become natural again.
But maybe I interpreted what he wrote in that section as being like, for example, like here in this bowl that you brought in, there's these like little raised bumps where there's all of the silt from the clay, silt, right? Or the grain from the clay.
They call it grog, but yes.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Okay, I don't know where I came up with that word from, but okay. But imagine someone came in and like threw in some little pieces of stone to give it that rough texture. That I feel is not authentic. You know what I mean? But yeah, no, I agree. Someone trying to go and recreate the methods and re-establish that particular practice of craft, that's awesome. Like that's something that happened with, so one of the essays that I read was on this one particular type of craft called kogen. And kogen is it's a type of embroidery in the northern part of Japan. And he taught, like, there's a lot to the story, but just for the sake of this point that I'm trying to make, he mentions at one point that he imagines in the next few generations it's going to disappear completely. And then I Googled it, and I realized that it's exploded like all over the, like, I don't know who brought it back, but somebody did some work to bring it back. Maybe for sure he had an influence in it. And now there's like books on teaching you Kogan embroidery. There's all kinds of products you can buy with that embroidery on it. And I think that's a nice way to honor the craft as well. Like, even if it's being repurposed and used in different ways, like it's no longer meant to be like a jacket for, you know, a young Japanese woman in northern Japan. That's not what it is anymore. It's something completely different. But I think Japanese industries have a really good track record of what's the word? Like
imagining?
Yeah, reimagining their industries and transforming them to something else to keep up with modernity.
Yeah, I think so. And they do love that patriotism didn't die with the empire at all. You know, they're very proud of their quirks, you know, like the Harajuku and all of that stuff, which is super quirky and very much Japanese. And of course, there's so many cultural things about Japan that have permeated the whole world that it almost makes it easy to be able to keep it current, like anime and manga and all of these crafts and
pop culture as well.
Yeah, so Japanese aesthetic is so widespread, and I love that he talks about the concept of muji, because the store Muji is so popular, and I actually never knew what it meant, and I never bothered to look it up. So him talking about that, I thought was amazing. It made sense. So then it made me think of all the popular kind of Japanese things. So muji is one. What's the woman on Netflix that
Marie Kondo?
Oh my God, I love her. She changed my life. And also that, and she talks a lot about home and, you know, really the joy of being home and thanking your things. I really love her philosophy. And I watched one episode and immediately rearranged all my closets. And
wow.
So I just feel like there's so much we can learn from Japan, and not just their concepts, but also in their crafts.
Yeah.
Like I mentioned the gold mending, kintsugi, and origami, which I absolutely love. And of course, pottery. There's so many aspects of pottery that they do, like the way that they fire, the way that they create forms.
Actually, this was something that I wanted to mention. Although this doesn't really have anything to do with the home, but there's this thing that he kept on referring to, which is that there was he constantly refers to the fact that repetition creates perfection, technological perfection. And I loved that he emphasized this so many times, because it needs to be emphasized, especially in like modern times when people are constantly jumping from one thing to another, you know, like I'm definitely guilty of that. But, you know, the point is I recognize a lot of what he was saying as being what people would describe currently as flow. You know what I mean?
But I feel like that's also Japanese philosophy.
Exactly.
So lean management systems came from Toyota. So Toyota are the ones that created, it was called the Toyota management system, I think, and that it was one error in a million, something like that. And from it came Lean Six Sigma. That's the error rate, Six Sigma, which is nothing. And that's just the Japanese philosophy, is just keep doing it. It doesn't encourage explore everything, which is what the West is, right? I mean, in the US, you can go to university and be undeclared, you know?
Yeah, which is just wild
right?
to me.
So in Japan, I feel like, I mean, I don't know, but it just doesn't seem like part of their culture at all.
No.
And anyone who works with Japanese companies talks about actually how difficult that is as an outsider to really work for Japanese companies, but then they really just want to attain perfection by repetition and by clear procedures and processes.
Yes. I love this. For me, like, I feel like Japan is one of those rare places where they really, a lot of what their culture now embodies a lot of their old philosophies, and reading this book helped me appreciate things. Because I remember one of my friends went to Japan a while back, and she was like, people's system of thinking is different. It's just fundamentally different. And I really think that this philosophy of aesthetic appreciation is a huge part of it, which I never thought would be the case, you know? Like, you know, they have a whole vocabulary to describe beauty. There's like, I noted some down, just a few: shibui, shibumi, which are, I think, synonyms; muji, the beauty of muji; then buji, which is natural beauty; then wabi and sabi, and byojotu. Anyways, there's so many. I didn't even get all of them. But the fact that they have this strong vocabulary for it just shows how important it is. And he made a passing reference as well to Japan being at the time one of the few places left in the world where everybody surrounds themselves every day with objects of beauty. Something like that, something along those lines. I'm paraphrasing, but I think now to like the average modern home, and I cannot say that about any like very few homes. You know?
And that's why I think the Japanese idea of home is so amazing, because it's so simple and so ritualistic as well. There's so many rituals that surround it. And I guess in that way, they always, it's easy almost to find home or to establish home, because it's so ritualistic, you know? So first of all, super simple, like with the paper doors and paper walls. You have to take off your shoes, the socks and the clogs, you know, the Zen gardens. And, you know, that process of kind of combing. It always has to be perfect. It always has to look a certain way.
Yeah, and shrines if people are religious.
Yeah, and then the tea ceremonies. Like, there are just so many rituals that relate to home, and so many objects, like the tea bowls, like the ceremony jars that they have. And I just think that that's really amazing. It almost gives a sense of comfort.
Yeah,
right?
And it roots people, I think. It grounds people is the word I'm thinking of.
So then it's always familiar.
Yeah.
And you can take, because the objects are fairly simple and small, you can take them with you everywhere and create that space everywhere you go, I feel.
Do you feel like you have been unconsciously, or do you feel like any of these ideas have been stuff that you've been practicing with scene ceramics?
Yes, definitely with the imperfections, because when I was learning, you collapse pieces a lot. It's quite difficult to learn the wheel, and you have to really love and come to terms with failure. It's very humbling. Like, things will collapse and break and disfigure. But there were a couple of things, once they disfigured, I kept, even though when you're learning, they tell you not to, you shouldn't have a lot of attachment to your learning pieces. It should be learning for the sake of learning. But some of them I would keep. And then it's like, okay, I have these disfigured pieces. But then that's why I was telling you, like with your teacup, that that's how I started making candles, because I wanted to find function to these kind of disfigured pieces. And so now I make candles. Now I intentionally actually disfigure, you know, much to Yanagi's horror, I intentionally disfigure pieces because people also love the oddness of it, you know, and I often get asked, and most of the time it happens by chance, you know, I'll manipulate it a little bit, maybe make the wheel a little bit too fast, put my finger in the wrong place, you know, but it's pure almost coincidence. Like, you can never order 50 of the same wonky pots, never, because it's kind of
they'll all be wonky in their own way.
Yes, exactly. And I find finding beauty in that, it took me time, because you're constantly, at least in the Western form of pottery, which is the one I learned, you're targeting perfection and uniformity. Like, all of the potters that I admire can make things really consistently, and there's so many tools I have to do that. And then, of course, if someone orders like a cafe or something, you know, you have a coffee machine that gives you 7 ounces, you have to make a 7-ounce cup, so you really need to know how to do that. But then after I started exploring some of the Japanese, you know, methods, and how they really love the chance element of what pottery can give you, I really started to kind of be open to it, you know, open to the disfigurement. And not just that, even when you put it in a kiln, I just have a regular Western electric kiln, but the Japanese, they do something called raku, which is you put in a pot, the pot into the kiln, fire it to 800 degrees, and then remove it while it's hot. And while it's hot, you put things on it and see what happens. So horsehair, feathers, earth, like different types of sand. You can even use different metals to see how it will react with the heat.
Oh, wow.
And you can never predict how it's going to turn out. And I find that really amazing. And it's really only in Japan that they would come up with these things, because they're constantly trying to, not even trying, it just happens. They're just very open to the chance element of it and finding beauty in it.
Yeah, that's amazing. I never knew about that. And have you tried it yet? This raku?
Just last week, actually, there was someone locally who was doing a raku workshop. So it was the first time I tried it. And I did take one of my cups and use the horsehair, and it was a really beautiful outcome. But it requires its own clay, its own tools and everything. So I took one of my regular pots, and so it cracked. Yeah. But I still use it as a pen holder now. It was a cup. I use it as a pen holder. But I would love to one day go to Japan and just just learn, from one of these kind of masters. Yeah,
Wow.
it would be amazing.
That would be amazing. Yeah. Wow. I am really excited to see what's seen ceramics. I know one thing that you recently stocked Mint and Coco's.
I did, yes. I mean,
crockery.
That's
awesome.
Great. I did mugs, so cups with handles and cups without handles.
Yeah.
And it was really great because Mint and Cocoa is so established.
Yeah.
So it was really good for me.
And it fits so well. I can totally see this aesthetic working well together.
Yeah, but I hope for more. I mean, Oman is really becoming open to that. There's so many cafes now with handmade cups, handmade plates. Lots of restaurants are kind of exploring it. We do, unfortunately, have a little bit of a lack of appreciation for the time, effort, and therefore cost. It is needed, to produce one cup. There is a bit of an attitude like, well, I could buy this from Lulu for 2 riyals, and obviously I can't make it for that price.
See, this is what Yanagi fought against.
Yes, absolutely. So I think but it's changing, and I think that's the great thing.
Yeah.
And I hope there'll be a Scene Ceramics in every home, and
there's one in mine.
And then that can be everyone's piece of home. Since that's what we're talking about.
I have some Scene Ceramics in my home and in my office, and it honestly literally like what Yanagi describes as like looking at something and just feeling happy to see it, because you make these awesome circular vases.
Oh yeah, the donut vases.
Are that what they call
it?
Yeah. Donut.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they're just so perfect to look at. It just brings me joy every day.
But handmade things, there really is beauty in the handmade and the imperfections. And even these master European or Western potters that strive for perfection, there's always, even because it's so unpredictable, you don't know how the kiln is going to react. There'll always be something unique about that. And I love it.
Yeah.
And I also love ceramics. Like even before I started making it myself, I've been kind of collecting as well. And the cover of the book with the teapot, I actually collect teapots as well on my travels. Of course, most of them are Asian, but I have some others as well. And I never realized now that I make ceramics, how many of them are handmade and or ceramic. And it's just, I must have always been drawn to it, but never really given the opportunity to explore it.
In that case, I have a recommendation for you, a quick book recommendation. I have to. And he actually wrote a quote for this book. Edmund Duval, he wrote an amazing story. It's true. It's true story called The Hare with the Amber Eyes. It's true in a way. It's like his family history told through the perspective of this one Japanese object called an itsuki, which traveled from generation to generation within his family from the time his great-great-great-granduncle or something was in Japan. He's Austrian, and he was Austrian, and just moved through from family to family and ended up with him. So I think for anyone who has any appreciation of beautiful objects and ceramics, this is a wonderful book to read. So highly recommend it.
Definitely.
Get it on your Kindle.
Adding it to my reading list for sure.
Yes. Thank you so much, Sara, for joining me today. This was just as fun as I thought it was going to be.
Thank you.
Can you tell our listeners where we can find more information about you, about Scene Ceramics?
Yeah, sure. So I have Instagram is the best way. It's scene.ceramics. And that would be the best way to get in touch or to see what's happening. I do some of the markets. So I did like Souq al-Sabt, now it's on hold, or whenever there's seasonal markets. And I sometimes stock in the shops, depending on the time. But I'm hoping to do more with different cafes and also hopefully do something for Ramadan, have some kind of gift stuff for Ramadan and Eid. So I hope to do that. But yeah, Instagram would be the best way.
I'm getting more of your stuff, just to let you know. I need to get the rest of my house in order before I can move on to ceramics, but that's on my list. I can't wait.
But be careful of your cats.
Yeah.
They sound like they might break them. So.
Yeah. The Papercut Club is a member of the Oman FM podcast collective. You can find all of Oman FM's latest shows and updates on Instagram at omanfm.om. This episode was hosted by me, Fatma Makki, and edited and mixed by Abdullah Al-Mawali. To find out more about the Papercut Club, find us on Instagram and TikTok at thepapercut.club or visit our website at www.thepapercut.club. Thank you for listening and happy reading.
paper, cut, glove, Onoman FM.